Your phone rings. It's your mom. Your stomach immediately tightens. You consider not answering. You know you should answer. She's your mother. She raised you. She loves you. But the thought of talking to her right now fills you with a specific kind of dread that's hard to explain to people whose relationships with their parents are easy and uncomplicated. You answer. The conversation starts normal enough. Then comes the criticism disguised as concern. Are you eating well? You look thin in that photo you posted. Or the guilt trip. I haven't heard from you in days. I guess I'm not important to you anymore. Or the boundary violation. When are you going to give me grandchildren? Your cousin just announced she's pregnant, and you can feel yourself regressing. You're 32 years old, a functional adult with a career and your own life. But 10 minutes on the phone with your parent, and you're feeling like a teenager again. Defensive, anxious, guilty, frustrated, unable to maintain the boundaries and composure you have with literally everyone else in your life. You love your parents, or at least you think you should love them. Society says you should, but you don't know how to be around them without feeling emotionally drained, criticized, or like you're constantly failing some invisible standard you'll never meet. And the worst part? You feel guilty about feeling this way. They're your parents. They sacrificed for you. They did their best. Why can't you just have a normal, easy relationship with them like other people seem to? But here's what you need to understand. Struggling to deal with your parents isn't a moral failure. It's not ungrateful or abnormal. It's the natural result of specific psychological dynamics that developed in childhood and never got resolved. And tonight, I'm going to show you exactly what those dynamics are and why they make adult relationships with parents so impossibly difficult for some people. Before we dive deep into applied psychology, subscribe to the channel. Tell me in the comments where you're from. Rachel Kim was 35 years old when she finally admitted to her therapist, "I can't stand being around my mother for more than 2 hours without wanting to scream." Not because her mother was abusive, not because of any dramatic trauma, but because every interaction left Rachel feeling criticized, infantilized, and emotionally exhausted. Her mother would comment on her weight, her apartment cleanliness, her career choices, her relationship status, all framed as concern or just trying to help. Would guilt trip Rachel for not visiting more often, not calling enough, not being the daughter she'd imagined. Would violate boundaries Rachel had set repeatedly, as if those boundaries were suggestions rather than requirements. And Rachel couldn't figure out how to make it stop. She'd tried being direct. Her mother would cry and accuse Rachel of being cruel. She'd tried being indirect. Her mother would ignore the hints completely. She'd tried limiting contact. Her mother would complain to other family members that Rachel was distant and ungrateful. "Why can't I just deal with my own mother like a normal person?" Rachel asked her therapist, voice heavy with shame. Her therapist's response changed everything, because your mother never allowed you to develop a separate self. And now, as an adult, every interaction threatens the identity you finally built. What Rachel discovered through therapy was that difficulty dealing with parents almost always traces back to what psychologists call enmeshment, or lack of differentiation, the failure to develop a psychological self that's separate from your parents. Dr. Murray Bowen's family systems theory explains that healthy child development requires differentiation, the process of becoming a separate person with your own thoughts, feelings, preferences, and identity distinct from your parents. This should happen gradually throughout childhood and adolescence, but in enmeshed families, differentiation is discouraged or prevented. Parents treat children as extensions of themselves rather than separate individuals. Boundaries are weak or non-existent. The child's role becomes meeting the parent's emotional needs rather than developing their own independent identity. Rachel recognized this pattern immediately. Growing up, her mother had discouraged independence. Any attempt Rachel made to have different opinions, make her own choices, or establish separate interests was met with hurt feelings, guilt trips, or subtle punishment. "If you loved me, you'd," became a constant refrain. "After everything I've done for you" was weaponized regularly. Rachel learned early that being a separate person with separate needs meant hurting her mother, so she learned to suppress her own identity and become whatever her mother needed her to be. This works in childhood when you're dependent and powerless, but in adulthood, the cost becomes unbearable. You've finally developed a separate self, your own career, relationships, values, life. but your parent still treats you like an extension of themselves. Every interaction becomes a battle between the self you've built and the role your parent demands you play. Dr. Lindsay Gibson's research on emotionally immature parents identifies that parents who struggle with emotional regulation, self-awareness, and empathy often create these enmeshed dynamics. They're not consciously trying to harm their children, they genuinely don't understand that their children are separate people with separate needs. Rachel's mother loved her intensely, but that love was conditional on Rachel being who her mother needed. The successful daughter she could brag about, the devoted child who prioritized her mother's feelings over her own needs, the perfect extension of her mother's identity. When Rachel tried to be herself, make career choices her mother disagreed with, set boundaries about phone calls, decline family obligations, her mother experienced it as rejection and betrayal, because in her mother's mind, Rachel's separate identity was a threat to their relationship. There's also what Dr. Carol McBride calls the narcissistic parent dynamic, where parents see their children primarily as sources of validation, achievement, or emotional support, rather than as separate individuals to nurture. Rachel's accomplishments were important to her mother, only as they reflected on her mother. Rachel's struggles were met with shame and disappointment rather than support. Rachel's needs were dismissed as inconvenient or selfish. Everything was filtered through how it affected her mother. This created a fundamental problem. Rachel could never just be herself around her mother. Every interaction required performing the role of perfect daughter, managing her mother's emotions, suppressing her own needs and boundaries. It was exhausting, and it made genuine connection impossible. Dr. Terrence Real's work on relational trauma shows that these dynamics create what he calls the adapted self versus the authentic self. The adapted self is the version of you that learned to survive your family system, compliant, emotionally regulated, meeting others' needs. The authentic self is who you actually are, your genuine feelings, needs, boundaries, preferences. When Rachel was around her mother, she slipped into adapted self mode automatically. All the growth she'd done in therapy, all the boundaries she'd learned to set with others, all the self-awareness she'd developed, it disappeared. She regressed to the role she'd learned in childhood because that pattern was so deeply ingrained. This is why people who are confident, assertive, and boundaried in every other relationship become anxious, defensive children around their parents. The childhood dynamics are so powerful they override adult functioning. The guilt component is also crucial. Dr. Susan Forward's work on toxic parents shows that many emotionally unhealthy families use guilt as a control mechanism. Children are taught that their needs are burdens, their boundaries are selfish, their independence is betrayal. Rachel felt guilty every time she prioritized her own needs over her mother's wants. Guilty for not calling more often. Guilty for living in a different city. Guilty for having her own life. The guilt was so powerful it overrode rational understanding that these were completely reasonable adult choices. This guilt isn't natural or inevitable. It's installed. Children in healthy families don't feel crushing guilt for becoming independent adults. That guilt is a symptom of enmeshed family dynamics where separation was treated as abandonment. Rachel's breakthrough came when her therapist helped her recognize, you can't have a healthy relationship with someone who refuses to see you as a separate person. Your mother doesn't want a relationship with the real you. She wants a relationship with the version of you that meets her needs and validates her identity. This was devastating to accept. Rachel wanted to believe that if she just communicated better, set boundaries more clearly, or tried harder, the relationship could work. But the fundamental problem wasn't Rachel's behavior. It was her mother's inability to relate to her as a separate adult with equal needs and valid boundaries. Dr. Marsha Linehan's dialectical behavior therapy emphasizes that you can validate someone's feelings while maintaining your boundaries. Rachel started practicing this. I understand you feel hurt when I don't visit more often, and I'm still only able to visit once a month because of my work schedule and need for personal time. Her mother didn't accept this well. Increase the guilt trips, the emotional manipulation, the complaints to other family members, because Rachel's boundaries threatened the enmeshed dynamic that had always worked for her mother. Rachel had to accept something painful, choosing herself, her authentic needs, her healthy boundaries, her separate identity, meant accepting that her relationship with her mother would be limited, strained, and disappointing. This doesn't mean cutting contact necessarily. It means accepting that the relationship you want, where your mother sees you, respects you, supports your authentic self, may never exist. and building a relationship structure that protects your well-being even if it disappoints your parent. For Rachel, this meant shorter, more structured visits with clear time limits, limited phone calls on a schedule she controlled, refusing to engage with guilt trips or criticism, accepting that her mother would be upset, and allowing that without fixing it. It meant grieving the mother she wished she had, the one who could celebrate Rachel's success without making it about herself, who could respect Rachel's boundaries without taking them personally, who could see Rachel as a separate person worthy of respect. 2 years later, Rachel's relationship with her mother is still difficult. But Rachel is no longer destroyed by it. She's accepted her mother's limitations, protected her own well-being through boundaries, and stopped trying to fix a dynamic that requires both people to change when only one is willing. "I still wish it was different," Rachel told me. "I see friends who have easy, loving relationships with their parents, and I feel jealous. But I've stopped blaming myself for our difficulties. My mother can't give me what I need emotionally. That's sad, but it's not my failure. If you can't deal with your parents, it's probably not because you're doing something wrong. It's probably because the relationship patterns established in childhood, enmeshment, poor boundaries, conditional love, emotional manipulation never got resolved. You became an adult, developed a separate self, built your own identity, but your parents still relate to you as if you're the child whose job is to meet their needs. That creates unbearable tension. You're not ungrateful. You're not a bad child. You're a person who's trying to be authentic while relating to people who need you to be someone else. That's impossible to navigate without pain. The solution isn't fixing yourself or trying harder. It's accepting the limitations of the relationship, protecting your authentic self, and building the boundaries that allow you to interact without losing yourself. Some parent relationships can heal with work from both sides. Some can't. And either way, your well-being matters more than maintaining a relationship structure that requires you to abandon yourself. And that's the end of our experience. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like. It's very important for us to know the truth. Be honest in the comments, leaving creative suggestions so we can improve the quality of our content more and more. Comment where you're from. Check out the video on the screen. I'm sure you'll like it. See you in a few seconds. We are Applied Psychology, and this is our contribution. Subscribe.